don't know your numbers, you don't know your business. I learned this the hard way with my first company, so I created NetSuite, the world's #1 cloud business system. NetSuite gives you the visibility and control you need to make smart decisions and grow with confidence. That's why companies who use NetSuite grow 3 times faster than the S&P 500.
Schedule your free product tour right now.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Digital Leader Show, where we talk key issues and news at the intersection of business and technology in hopes of making you a better digital leader. Today, we're discussing AI and the war for human talent, plus headlines for digital leaders from the world of enterprise technology. We're live every Wednesday at noon Eastern, 9 Pacific on LinkedIn and YouTube. And the audio recording is available the following week, wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks to our sponsor, Oracle NetSuite. Their cloud ERP helps provide real-time visibility into operational and financial performance. IRPA AI members and followers get preferred pricing of 45% off. Just go to irpaai.com/NetSuite for more information. I'm Dan Goodstein. I head up IRPA AI and the Digital Enterprise Institute, a professional association, media, and peer-to-peer research network, providing education, networking advice to over 130,000 members globally around automation, enterprise AI, and digital transformation. I'm joined today by Chris Surdak. He's a senior analyst for IRPA AI, formerly White House Chief Transformation Office Advisor, partner for digital transformation at Gartner, and AI practice lead at EY. He's an award-winning author, having written 3 books, including The Care and Feeding of Bots, an owner manual for RPA, Data Crush, how the information tidal wave is creating new business opportunities, and Jerk, 12 Steps to Rule the World. Chris, how are we doing? Are we ruling the world today or what?
I think someone is, or certainly the world is changing. I think it was Lenin who famously said, and I'm going to paraphrase it, some decades nothing happens and some years decades happen. It kind of feels like that.
Yeah, I feel like the first day of every month, I'm like, this was a crazy month today.
Exactly. We're living in dog years, I think.
Yeah.
Maybe Doge years, I guess now.
Doge year. I mean, if you're a news junkie, I mean, this is like the golden age of news consumption. I mean, the headlines change so quickly that I had my headlines yesterday for today's show, and I think I redid them all today, including one that completely reversed in all of 24 hours, which is the U.S. Postal Service suspending inbound parcels from China and Hong Kong in conjunction with this executive order, only to reverse that policy less than 24 hours later. So this morning they said they'd start accepting packages from China and Hong Kong again. Yesterday they announced a pause. There was no reason provided for exactly why. But it's believed to be in conjunction with the U.S. tariffs on Chinese goods. The executive order that was signed revoked this exemption for packages less than $800 coming into the U.S., which was originally designed for gifts and U.S. citizens sending things back to the U.S. From those places. But it's been a loophole for e-commerce. And as e-commerce has blown up, you can imagine the ramifications of that.
I hadn't seen this until you mentioned it to me a little while ago, and the thing I'm struck with is whatever we see on the surface of any of these stories, there's a huge backstory behind it, as you kind of imply there. Well, under $800 is tariff free. How much stuff is coming across? How many billions of dollars is coming across in less than $800 chunks? We're sort of now living in a world where a headline no longer is, right? It's just something that floats past and something else is going to come up in the next 30 seconds. But yeah, when I see something like this, I'm struck that what's the backstory? It's got to be fascinating.
Yeah, and it makes it, I don't know, one part exciting, one part tricky, scary. When you see, because you're right, like these headlines are really pieces of quotes in a lot of cases, and with Trump taking office, love him or hate him, he says these things, and I think people don't know, like, is he joking, or is this a policy, or is this a promise? Like, you don't know. I mean, I was at a sporting event yesterday and talking to some colleagues and stuff, and like literally as we're sitting there, like this headline after headline, ping, 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 the Gaza thing, this thing, like all the, and it's like, I think just some reporters talked to him for 20 minutes. Now there's 400 headlines, as a result of that conversation. But huge ramifications in the U.S. Thinking about how many goods come in from China, especially from the e-commerce players. This particular article mentions Temu and a couple other Chinese companies, but even Amazon. I mean, a good chunk of the marketplace vendors on Amazon, are either drop shipped or directly shipped from China. So interesting.
A gargantuan amount of potential trade. And then, you were kind of touching on just love him or hate him, Trump is Trump. I mean, I remember reading his book, The Art of the Deal, 30 years ago. And so much of his bluster and so forth is straight out of the book. It's like, take it when you start a negotiation, take a completely unreasonable, extreme position, and then work your way back from that. So if you look at the results from the last 2 weeks, again, love him or hate him, it certainly seems to be working.
There was another piece that came right after the inauguration, and it kind of got buried in a gazillion other headlines, but it was around India saying that they're going to repatriate 18,000 illegal immigrants from the U.S. In an attempt to avoid a trade war with the U.S. I thought that was really, obviously relevant to us in the outsourcing world, but these are people that, have come to the U.S. and, are working here, I think on, mostly working visas. A lot of them, I guess, like any other immigration, right? They end up staying here, they change jobs or whatever. But that's a big move on the part of India. I wonder if it's how it's affecting some of these, quote unquote, the Indian outsourcers, right? That we've all worked with so many times.
Well, and one of the ways that I got to know you is through my association with the Outsourcing Institute. And so I've worked in outsourcing since it almost began in the late 1990s. And it's interesting, the discussion of sort of the brain drain, taking the very top talent from countries all over the world and bringing them to the U.S., obviously a benefit to us, but necessarily a harm to the local economy. So in some ways, this is almost a help to globalization in that India brings those people back. But yeah, as we move into our discussion in this show on the war for talent, I think that AI is going to deeply amplify the need to have people who really know what they're doing, have a high degree of expertise. And I think that sort of the polarization of the labor force is inevitable. And we're going to see a tremendous war for talent globally.
Yeah, that's our main topic for today. So we'll get there in a couple minutes. But the other thing that jumped out at me again, it was kind of buried in the headlines, but significant for us, anybody watching who is in the business of building technology. The U.S. Copyright Office released some guidance last week stating that any AI created works can't be copyrighted unless they can prove evidence that humans contributed creatively. So I guess they're trying to avoid copywriting, what we would refer to as kind of prompt engineering. But it's very interesting, potentially alarming to anybody who's trying to build AI IP, I think.
As I mentioned to you before, I'm back to writing. I have a few books in line, and one of them is going to be the gray goo. And I talk a lot about the digital gray goo. This is the gray goo problem. I mean, if you can imagine, you just have AI start dumping what could potentially be copyrighted works. You can imagine AI dumping patent applications on the Patent and Trade Office, and just people being overwhelmed by volumes of content, which may or may not be good. But the processes designed to kind of consume and manage all this content are going to be completely overwhelmed by this stuff. So I think it's a bit of a preemptive move. We're going to need it. And again, I think the contributions of humans to this, I mean, it's very obvious when you see something that was written by AI, in my opinion. I can readily tell because it all follows sort of the same patterns, which makes sense. And as the AIs get a little bit better, I think OpenAI's research bot is supposed to be substantially better. it's we're going to need to kind of have these gating factors that cut off the digital gray goo that we're all going to be swarmed with here shortly.
Salesforce announced this week they're going to cut 1,000 jobs, but they're going to recruit more staff to boost its AI products, according to Bloomberg anonymous sources. Not in yet which divisions are going to see the reductions, but CEO Mark Benioff had recently announced plans to hire as many as 2,000 people to sell the company's newly dubbed Agentforce AI platform. This is exactly what we're talking about. In fact, I probably should have saved this for our main topic segment of you talking about the labor force. But this is exactly what you're talking about, right? The kind of middle level. I assume it's going to be kind of the middle level people, going away, and the people that are AI experts getting hired.
Yeah, and I mean, what a radical swing in just a couple of months. We're going to hire several thousand to we're starting the layoffs. And I think that is a reflection of the shift in what we define as useful work and useful talent. There's a lot of stuff that this technology can do. And there is some value to taking people that are sort of below average in whatever they're working on and bringing them up to average, which is about what AI can do at the low end of the labor force. But at the high end of the labor force, I got to get the best possible people I can and use the technology to enhance what they do. So there's going to be tremendous pressure to downsize sort of rank and file people in an organization. At the same time, there's going to be tremendous pressure to get and retain the most AI literate and best possible contributors so that the tools work to maximum effect.
Because it's the turnover has gone down. There's a Department of Labor data report that said just under 40 million people quit their jobs last year, which was down 11% from 2023 and 22% from 2022. So it's the slowest rate of turnover in the workforce since 2020. And then the Wall Street Journal came out and said that, based on some interviews they did with economists, hiring has slowed, but it depends on the industry, right? I think some of these oversimplified stats can be, confusing. There's a lot of jobs and seemingly turnover in healthcare and hospitality, but tech roles and legal roles and some others have increased in difficulty to come by.
Yeah, and as you say, the aggregate number doesn't really explain the story underneath, and I think what you're seeing there is again that shift in skill set and what organizations are looking for and what they need. By the same token, I've seen figures where something like 87 or 88% of all people on LinkedIn are actively looking for a new job, even if they're working.
Everybody get that open to work loop around there,
which is effectively everyone, right? And I think we're certainly in a time of a lot of uncertainty, and when there's uncertainty, you like to have a steady income for sure. So I think that there's partially it's a reflection of that too. But I think we're going to be in for such a wild ride. I think over 20,000 federal employees have already said yes to the administration's offer.
Wow.
Yeah, it's 20,000 so far. And then apparently they just made an offer to the entire workforce of the CIA. You can get an 8-month severance package if you accept it now. So there's going to be a heck of a lot of people that are potentially shifting from government to commercial work here in the near term. So I expect a lot of disruption. And I think those folks that have a job are going to be happy to keep it while everything kind of works itself out over the next year or so.
Yeah. As Surdak just commented, I was watching that he knows people that are being sent back to India right now, actually. So, you look at this and a lot of the news headlines is around, undocumented workers and, South America and, blaming the cartels and all of that stuff. But this is a real ramification happening to the business community from some of these policies. Again, whether you think it's good or bad, but it's happening, right? It's not just so it's some of it's talk maybe, but a lot of it's action. A lot of this stuff is actually happening. I'd be remiss if we didn't do OpenAI. I think it's gonna be its own segment. OpenAI announcements, headlines for this week. So, following up the bombshell that kind of shocked the tech industry around Chinese DeepSeek, OpenAI claims that it has evidence that its models were actually used to train DeepSeek. So that was one OpenAI headline. They also launched their deep research product this week, which is an advanced AI tool to significantly enhance multifaceted online research, claiming it can synthesize large volumes of data faster than human researchers. And SoftBank is collaborating with Sam Altman to establish OpenAI Japan with a plan of investing $3 billion annually in AI services for Japanese companies. So, you can't go an hour without 3 headlines coming out from OpenAI.
Yeah, well, and I like the subtitle there. Oh, the irony! OpenAI saying, "How dare you take our material and learn from it?" When they just basically vacuumed up the entire internet and everybody's copyrighted material to train themselves. All's fair in love and war, and apparently also in the AI marketplace. So it doesn't surprise me. What I do think is interesting, the $3 billion investment in Japan. I saw an announcement this morning that the EU has set aside $25 million to start building AI capability in Europe. I'm like, talk about a drop in the bucket, So they lead with regulation and follow up with investment. We start with investment and kind of follow up with regulation. It's totally opposite approach.
Yeah. In fact, the EU started, I think it's this week, enforcing the AI Act. So these restrictions around what they call kind of high risk AI applications is going into effect, is being implemented, and companies face substantial penalties for non-compliance. So they are emphasizing AI safety and accountability, arguably above innovation. So always interesting to see how different it is on the other side of the pond.
Well, and it's a great point. It goes back to like personal privacy, information privacy, and their GDPR regulations from over a decade ago, where I wonder how many organizations that do operate in Europe are aware that they're now under those regulations, and hopefully their CISOs and general counsels are on top of all of that.
Yep. So let's get back to that main topic, which is the war for talent. And you wrote this piece last week, and I love that you called it the war for human talent, because we have to start parsing that out, right? Or with all this agentic AI agents, there's certainly a quest for AI talent, AI digital workers, but I think the punchline, not to bury the lead, but I think the punchline here is that the AI boom is accelerating what we kind of always expected technology to do, and maybe automation to do, but and that's really kind of changed the makeup of the workforce. Yes.
Yeah. Technology is a lever, right? And I forget which Greek philosopher said, "Give me a lever long enough, and I can move the world." And that's what technology does. It enhances, for better or worse, any human ability that we have. But we're stretching for the notion that we're going to replace people as opposed to augment people. And I think there's a real fallacy there. We certainly saw it with RPA for the better part of 10 years. You'd go in and you'd automate a process or pieces of a process using rules-based automation. And, you might get some benefits, but oftentimes it caused more problems than it was necessarily worth, or it just shifted the workload from the process step that you automated to a downstream or upstream process step. And I just saw this yesterday with some colleagues on LinkedIn talking about this, where they used AI for some process automation, and it made a particular step faster, but then they had to spend all kinds of time. It was using AI to develop software code. So instead of taking 2 hours to write some code, you could do it in 5 minutes. But instead of taking 2 hours to debug your code, it now took 6 hours to figure out what the AI did. So you have to be very careful in any of this automation work. Are you merely shifting workloads somewhere else, or are you truly automating things? And as much as RPA was very use case dependent in determining whether it was valuable or not, I think AI is even more so, because we're just shifting from rules-based automation to guess-based automation, which is kind of what it is.
And you know, you mentioned in here that it's leading to job polarization, right? With more low skill jobs being automated, high skill jobs more in demand. What do you think is the long term implications of this, especially if you're kind of somewhere in the middle?
Well, they have a saying, I think in Texas, if an armadillo is in the middle of the road, the armadillo is going to get run over. So being in the middle is a bad place to be. I mean, I wrote this in my first book back in
No man's land for the tennis players out there.
Right? Yeah. 2013, I wrote about this in my first book. Polarization was going to be fundamental to every marketplace that's impacted by technology and is going to get worse. And I think we're seeing that for sure now. At the low end of skill base, a lot of what people do is simply going to be replaced by the technology, thinking things like help desk, chatbots, stuff like that. At the high end, and this is even more so if I look at the deep research from OpenAI, for example. Yes, it can produce tremendous outputs of really cool content, really deep content, really meaningful content, but then someone has to read it and understand it and evaluate whether or not it's right. The technology still can be and it will be delusional at times. It's never going to stop. It will fabricate stuff if it can't find what you're looking for. And so you need someone with enough skill and knowledge and experience to evaluate those outputs and make sure that they're not false. So again, at the high end, people that have those abilities are going to be even more in demand. And you're going to have to pay even more to get them. So then the question is it worthwhile, right? By the time I invest in the AI and have to hire these more talented, more expensive people to implement, are we better off or not? And this brings up another thing that I've seen a lot of people talking about, and that is, how do you get experience if the low end, when I started working, I had to learn how to be an engineer. I had to learn all the business skills and so forth that I developed. But over my career, I've built up those skills. If the low end is all replaced by AI, if entry-level positions are all replaced by AI, how does a person through their career develop those skill sets so they can have that level of talent and experience? We're kind of cutting off the inbound feed of the human talent pool. So these are going to be some significant societal challenges that we're going to face, and we're getting there very quickly right now.
That's a huge point, Chris. That's a huge point. It's funny. This years ago, this is like the beginnings of automation, not even AI. I remember I had a friend who just graduated law school and he was struggling to get his first job. And I went to one of, I had fortunately this big network and lots of attorneys on our network. And so I went to one of the more senior, experienced, older attorneys buddies that I had. And I said, what's your advice, for my friend? He's, just struggling breaking in. He goes, honestly, my advice is don't become an attorney. I said, why? He said, because exactly what you're talking about, because technology is making it so that all of the entry level work that teaches and onboards and vets incoming talent is going away.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Similarly, I was talking to a professor friend of mine just last week, and he's saying all of the homework that he gives to his class is all coming back AI generated. And he tried to police it for about the last year, and he finally gave up. I mean, there's no way you're going to stop students from doing that. But then he's had to shift his evaluation criteria and so forth to not did you write 10 pages, but did you make any sense of it? Right. Which is what is going to be the determining factor. That's the human input, the creativity, the critical thinking, the abstract thought. All of those skills are what is going to be needed in an AI enabled world. And unfortunately, we're going to have to realign education. We're going to have to realign things like, work study and so forth to look for those skills and to further refine those skills for people. That's going to be the critical aspect. We need to look again, AI is not replacing people, it's supporting people. And so we need to have this sort of cybernetic approach rather than get rid of all of our people and it's all going to happen in the computer.
Yeah. And also the hiring process, right? I mean, how do we, it's kind of like, I remember talking a few weeks ago about, AI and cybersecurity. I think it was you or one of our guests that said, "Hey, while the bad guys get better, we get better at stopping them, and then they get right." It's just this kind of arms race, to use an overused term. But even in the talent acquisition space, there's more and more AI and technology being used to vet candidates, but now there's actually being AI to submit applications. So you have this escalating effect. What do you do? How do you kind of organize the influx of AI on both sides of the recruiting process?
So 15 minutes before we got on, a post came across my LinkedIn feed from the CEO of Anthropic, one of the largest generative AI companies out there. And he's saying, candidates that are applying to our job positions, please don't use generative AI to apply to our generative AI company. which I mean, it's exactly the case in point. And I know some other recruiting folks, longtime colleagues that are in recruiting, and they're saying they'll post a very senior position, senior VP of something or other, and they'll get 10,000 applications in 3 hours. So that war of escalation, right? The automatic tracking systems that are posting positions, they're doing all kinds of automated filtration. And so they're being overwhelmed by other agentic bots that are throwing out resumes all over the place. So this is the digital gray goo problem. Eventually, there's so much content being thrown around, and AI agents are responding to other AI agents that nothing ever gets done. We're going to be intensely busy. We're going to be overwhelmed with work and content, but no output. It's going to be a real problem, I think.
Yeah, and then you have the concerns over context loss, hallucination, biases, right? How do you start mitigating some of those risks?
Well, and from the standpoint of finding talent and recruiting, people are just going to lie, or they're just going to make up whatever they need to in order to get through the various filters. And you're not going to know that so if you're putting out these crazy requirements, which I see all the time, the expectations that organizations are placing for the positions they're hiring are, must have 30 years of experience, but has to be a hand-on coder and must speak 7 languages. It's like, okay, there's 2 people on the planet that do that, and they're probably both CEOs of their own startups. They're not going to come work for you. But if you get a positive hit out of the 30,000 applications that you get, is it even legit? And are you going to? So you begin thinking, all right, I found legitimate candidates. My requirements are legitimate because those people do exist, and they may not. It may just be a bot that's trying to figure out how to get through your filters and finally does so. And so the signal to noise ratio is going to be absolutely tiny. There could be millions of possible candidates for your one impossible to fill role. And but in my subtitle, the delusion shepherd, we're gonna see this ever increasing, ever scaling up of sort of this delusion factor, because you think you can have these ridiculous requirements for whatever the role is. It appears that candidates actually exist, so you're going to be convinced that you're asking for the right thing, and it could all be an illusion, and you're not going to know the difference.
But so, and maybe you're the wrong person to ask this question because you've been saying this for a long time, but isn't the promise of AI to make it easier to get through data, to pull out patterns, to identify, insights? I mean, I think what you're saying is it's actually becoming the opposite. It's actually, becoming more noisy, more cluttered. Isn't that the opposite goal?
The AI can digest vastly more information than any human possibly could, which is something we've been working on for decades to get to that point. But to interpret, to make sense of, to rationalize all of that information, to reason, is still very much a human trait. And I don't know that we're going to figure out how to automate that part for a very long time. If we do, we're probably in a lot of trouble. Now a lot of people are talking, well, we're so close to AGI, and we need to have controls in place for when we get there. By the time, if we get to AGI or ASI, super intelligence, it's going to be so. The second that we achieve it, it's going to be so much smarter than us that it's going to make sure that we don't know that it's around. I mean, it could very well be here already. We just don't know it. But so that war, that constantly escalating war, is going to continue. yes, we're going to have access to vastly more information, but that means it's even more important that someone with human abilities can sort through it and figure out what's real and what's not. That is that polarization that we started the discussion talking about.
Yeah, it kind of clicked for me. You mentioned this this polarization, and the demand for high end talent, similar to professional sports. I mean, you look at professional athletes making 10-20 million dollars a year, and then the guy selling popcorn at the arena, I'm assuming making pretty close to minimum wage, and is probably a lot more replaceable than the guy making $20 million. Is that where we're headed? Is that really where we're headed in technology, where you have kind of this, elite few at the top of the pyramid and everything else is just bots, agents, and the like, digital workers?
I think largely so. And I've been warning of this for more than a decade. If you look at the absolute top talent, the people that really know what they're doing in this space, they're pulling down $1 million a year easy as a base. And that's as a 24-year-old developer who knows how this stuff actually works. I've met some of these people, hugely knowledgeable about this stuff. And they can name their price because they're so good at what they do. And that leads to the problem we were talking about a little while ago. Those people exist, but do they exist for you and your organization? Are you in a position to offer them $1 million a year? You may want that level of talent. You may need that level of talent, but can you compete? I mean, we're coming up to the Super Bowl. There's 40 NFL quarterbacks out there. They're all making 10, 15, $50 million a year. If you're the 41st best quarterback in the world, you're parking cars, right? You don't have a job. And so we're going to see that, I think, to a large extent in this space, with people that really understand either how to build these technologies or how to actually use them and leverage them going forward, which again leads to the problem of how do I pipeline people when they're younger so that they can build up the skill set so that they can deliver to this need. It's going to be a real challenge.
Well, to me, there's two areas, right? One is what do we do with all of these entry level, people? I think that's more of a societal workforce, question, but it's a huge one. The other is, okay, if you're currently in the middle of the pack, Chris, and like you said, you've been an engineer your whole life, and a disruptor your whole life. How do you get from the middle of the pack to the top 40 quarterback? What's your advice? What should people be doing to get out of that no man's land?
It's an excellent question. You have to, it all comes from experience. At this point in my career, because I've been doing this for 30 years, most of my days when I'm working, it's like Groundhog's Day, the movie Groundhog's Day, which, we just passed Groundhog's Day. Oh, I've seen this before. I've seen this before. I've seen this before. And so the fact that I've seen it before means that I kind of have a better sense of how to move forward with it. If people don't have those opportunities, you don't know how to respond. Everything coming at you is new. That's the value of experience. And how organizations, if organizations are trying to run so efficiently that they just need someone to come straight out of the gate and be able to deliver, that expectation of a learning curve kind of goes away. And so again, we're kind of cutting off the pipeline of people to develop experience going forward and making it more difficult. What does that mean for you as an individual as you're trying to develop your career? You got to find other avenues to get that experience. Interestingly, I think in a post-COVID world, you and I were just talking about COVID, lots of people sort of have side gigs, or they're doing gig work, or you can get online, there's all kinds of online training available and so forth. You got to be doing all that extra stuff, so that you have ever evolving, ever increasing skills, and in particular, look for stuff that isn't directly related to the work that you're doing. The other thing that I think makes people more valuable going forward is breadth of experience and breadth of knowledge as opposed to depth. You're not going to out deep an AI. You're not going to be able to do faster research than OpenAI's new research bot. But using a breadth of human experience to interpret those results, that's something that I don't believe the AI is going to be able to do for a while. And that's how you add value. So look for opportunities to broaden your skill set, bridge across the silos that exist in organizations. AI, in my view, is going to likely reinforce a lot of organizational silos as opposed to break them, which is not a good thing. But again, that's where humans come in. And then anything that you can do to improve kind of like social skills and so forth, because at the end of the day, it's people dealing with other people in business. The more the bots argue and deal with other bots, the more the human dealing with another human is going to be the real differentiator.
Yeah, no, I love all that advice. I think it's all great advice. I've always been a big proponent of the portfolio approach to life. On the last week's show, I was talking about the gig economy and having kind of a portfolio of various different things, so you're not relying on any single job or opportunity. So I agree with you, and we've been saying for years, Chris, right? Us and many of our colleagues that as technology becomes better and arguably even commoditized, people, relationships, experience, having experience and creating experiences becomes the differentiator, right?
Well, let's go back to your analogy of, there's the quarterback at the Super Bowl and then there's the guy selling popcorn. You can be the best popcorn seller in the world. You've probably seen people like that. They're not, there's the guy that's just kind of handing it out and not engaging with the audience. And then there's someone who's entertaining and they're funny and they're going to sell a lot more popcorn.
And
Selling
it's
popcorn
funny.
you can differentiate in almost anything, and it's the human touch, those humor and outreach and charisma. That's the differentiator there.
And you're 100% right, because when you said that, it evoked a memory for me, right? I remember the best concession vendor I've ever seen. It was at a minor league New York Mets game, minor league. The guy had his beer cart. He plops it down like he was mad or he dropped it. So it got everybody's attention. And he goes, "It's been a long week. How about a beer?" And that's how he walked around. I never forgot that guy. I was too young to, before I was in business, all that stuff. But I still, probably 20 years ago, I still remember 30 years ago. I remember this guy vividly. I can remember his face. I can remember his tactics. I can remember the crowd response. It stuck out. It was an experience.
You're the exact point. You remember that he engaged with you at an emotional human level. In a world of digital gray goo, that's the stuff that's going to be the deciding factor.
Yeah. All right. So how about from an employer standpoint? You got 40,000 applications coming in from AI agents. You figure out which ones are the creme de la creme. But now, me and every one of my competitors wants the same 12 people. How do you differentiate from an employer standpoint?
Really good question. I think everybody, if you look at, everybody's looking for, you must have 10 years of experience with this technology that's only been around for 7 years. I love those postings. But, do you know this particular language? Can you program in this particular platform? Platforms change every 3 to 6 months. I mean, the cycle time, the life. DeepSeek was around for a week, and it's the most downloaded app ever. We were amazed that it took 2 months for ChatGPT to be the most downloaded thing ever 2 years ago. And now DeepSeek does it in a week. So I think stop queuing off of what's and start queuing off of how's. It's kind of weird to say. So, typically ATS systems, if you're looking for skills, don't look for must know this language. Don't talk about the languages. Talk about the person's capacities and skills. I had this discussion with the recruiter a couple of weeks ago where I want someone who understands systems engineering, not a particular language, right? Someone who can think in systems approaches, someone who can decompose a problem and then compose a resulting answer to it. Whether you do that in C# or C++ or PyTorch or whatever is probably meaningless, because any one of those platforms is going to be different in 2 years anyway. So it's actually more important to me that you can decompose a problem, compose an answer, and then learn quickly the new language that's going to be around next year. So I think a lot of the filtration that you see in something like applicant tracking systems, and that companies use to try to find the quote right person, it's a lot of those sort of keywordy, do you have this, have you worked with this platform, that platform, this platform? It completely ignores that systems thinking and the ability to decompose a problem and then come up with answers. So we're asking sort of the wrong, we're asking for talents, skills, experiences that are easy to put into a position description, but that's not the thing that we need to hire for, particularly in a world where if I can have an AI write the code for me in 10 seconds, the ability to code is not the issue. The ability to debug is actually the issue. So, I think we're asking the wrong questions, and we're looking for the wrong things in the labor market, given what the technology is now capable of doing.
Yeah. Interesting. Chris, always interesting, my friend. Thanks for joining us, everybody. We'll be back on Wednesday at noon Eastern, 9 Pacific. In the meantime, if there's anything you're working on and want some help, or if you want a customized industry briefing or workshop, check out our team of analysts at irpaai.com/analysts for more information. In the meantime, have a great week, everyone, and don't blink, because the headlines will change momentarily.
Amen.
Take care, Chris. Thank you.
We'll see you.